Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, viewers all around the globe, welcome to this afternoon's Vinyl Countdown session. My name's Dan Harding, I'm Head of Music Performance here at the University of Kent. And for anyone who hasn't seen the show before, this is our weekly web show in which I invite a small group of sacrificial lambs, I mean willing volunteers, into the virtual studio here in order to vie for your votes live for their nominated album, so that by the end of the show, in about 45 minutes time, we can present them with the honoured title of Album of the Week. So whatever platform you're watching on, be it YouTube, Facebook or Twitter, by all means share your comments and reactions during the show as we go along, if you've been listening along to this week's nominated albums. And you can vote simply by commenting in whichever platform you're viewing on. And we will be monitoring the comments, and my colleague Sophie will be tallying the scores on the doors, so that hopefully by the end of the show you will have voted for one of our guests to have their choice nominated as this week's Album of the Week winner. So this is a very special edition this week, because I am delighted to say that I have got four revered colleagues who have graciously given up an hour of their lunch break in order to come and compete for your votes live. So this is a special university staff edition. So please welcome, with a thunderous round of virtual applause, which of course we won't hear, but I'm sure will be out there nonetheless, for my very first guest this week, Dr. Olly Double. Olly, welcome.
Hello, how's it going?
Very well, thank you. Nice to see you. Now, you're a reader in drama, aren't you?
I am indeed, right? Yeah. Yes, that's
One of the many hats that everyone's wearing in the studio this afternoon. So that's particularly good, because you can read the drama that's about to unfold and explain to us where the conflict lies.
Yeah, I do like the idea, by the way, of giving up an hour of our lunch break, as if our lunch break is normally 3 or 4 hours and we're giving up a little bit of it. That's a lovely idea. I wish the word was like that. That'd be great.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Obviously, the other 3 or 4 hours are simply, for ruminating and staring at trees and, thinking, pensive thoughts.
Yes, indeed. The life of the mind.
Fantastic. Well, many thanks for joining us live from Herne Bay. Is that right?
From Whitstable.
From Whitstable.
From sunny Whitstable. It is actually sunny at the moment as well.
Marvellous. Brilliant. Well, nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. And next into the virtual studio, please welcome Dr. Harmonie Toros. Harmonie, welcome.
Hello, thank you.
Nice to see you. So you're, again, one of the many hats that you're wearing. You're a reader in international conflict analysis. Have I got that right?
That is correct, yes.
So that's good, because you can be the sort of peacekeeping force when all hell breaks out here in the virtual studio, as the competition gets really fierce. You can be the sort of placatory voice above all.
Except that I spend my life telling people that conflict is good, because without conflict there is no change. But that's fine.
Brilliant. So there'll be plenty of conflict and maybe some change of views this afternoon. Anyway, nice to see you. Thank you for joining us. And next into the studio is the head of religious studies, so he will be able to pray for our souls should everything go wrong, Dr. Chris Deacy. Chris, welcome.
Hi, Dan. Hi, everybody. Good to be here.
How are you? Is all well with you?
It is fine. It was so good to go back and rediscover something that when I was 7 or 8 years of age was like the best, most thrilling album I've ever heard. So can't wait to share my experience with everybody this afternoon.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it. Many thanks for joining us. And finally into the studio, competing for your votes this afternoon, is senior lecturer in drama. So again, he'll be able to unpick the thorny issues which will no doubt unfold at the heart of this afternoon's episode. Wollen. Will, welcome.
Hi, Dan. Nice to see you.
Thank you for joining us. So similarly, you're broadcasting from the Isle of Thanet, is that right?
I am. I'm in the Isle of Thanet. It's the sunniest place I've ever lived in the British Isles, and we have blue skies. I don't know about everyone else. We've had a little bit of rain earlier, but it's lovely here. Always.
I thought you were going to start singing Jim Reeves there, Will. Actually, talking about blue skies in Thanet.
Oh, that's true. We could do Down to Margate as well. Yeah.
Bit of Chas and Day.
Oh dear, it's all kicking off and we haven't even got to the albums yet. Lordy.
Dan, you should have stuck with the students. You've got 45 minutes of this, I'm afraid.
Oh my word. Oh well, hopefully we will all survive. And finally into the virtual studio, not competing for your votes, viewers, but here to share her encyclopedic knowledge of pop punditry. Please welcome my colleague Sophie. Sophie, hello.
Good afternoon, everyone.
All well? Are you braced for this afternoon's Leviathan undertaking?
Absolutely. Canny wait. as they say where I come from.
Fantastic. Good. Nice to see you. So, yes, for the viewers at home, I will be hurling each of our speakers in turn into Speaker's Corner, and they will then have the floor in order to extol the virtues of their nominated album with you, in the hope that at the end of the show you might vote for their choice. So let's begin then by bringing Olly into Speaker's Corner. So, Olly, you have the virtual floor. So over to you. Tell us what album you've chosen and why you've chosen it.
So I have chosen X-Ray Spex, Germfree Adolescents. This is the vinyl copy of this that I got, I guess, probably for my 15th birthday. It had already been out a couple of years. And I first heard this. I grew up in Lincoln, and I first heard this at my friend Ian Goodman's house. He lived on the estate next to the school, and I went to his over lunch to listen to records, and we listened to this album. And I just thought, I'd heard the singles from it, but I just thought it was absolutely fantastic. And in fact, let's just feast our eyes on that sleeve for a start. So you see the band members there in test tubes, and it very much meshes with the content of the album. If you take the inner sleeve out, you can see that it's designed to look like bubble wrap. Bubble wrap was quite a new thing at the time. So this album, Germfree Adolescents, is all about, it's about the problem of being a human in a modern consumerized world. If that sounds pretentious, it really isn't in the way it plays out. So the very first thing that you hear when you put the album on is the first song's called Artificial, like a funny way of saying artificial. And the first thing you hear is Polystyrene. By the way, great stage name, one of the great stage names. The lead singer and the main creative force behind X-Ray Spex, Polystyrene. And you hear a voice with no other sounds behind it, just a bit of reverb on the vocal. Her incredibly powerful siren voice going, Artificial. And it goes into a song about, it has lines like, when I put on my makeup, the pretty little mask, not me. That's the way a girl should be in a consumer society. I want to be Instamatic. I want to be a frozen pea, and so on. And it goes on like that the whole time. So there's a song about genetic engineering. There's a song called Warrior at Woolworths. How's that a blast for the past, right? Yeah. Which is about kind of casual violence in, I suppose, the suburbs, around Woolworths or whatever. You've got songs called Identity, about sort of identity crisis. You've got Plastic Bag is one of the numbers, which is really terrifying song. One of the things I love about this album is it's kind of cool and it's kind of scary at the same time. Polystyrene's voice has to be heard to be believed. She really challenged notions of what a woman's voice should sound like, and so it sounds really exciting, but it's quite scary as well. So Plastic Bag. She talks about my dreams I daren't remember. I'll tell you what I've seen. I dreamt that I was Hitler, ruler of the sea, ruler of the universe, ruler of the supermarkets, and even fatalistic me. I mean, dreaming you're Hitler is a weird idea, particularly, I have to say, in the late 1970s, for a mixed race woman to be fronting a punk band. She was really quite a kind of challenging person in terms of the status quo. She did, as well as writing all the music, she did all the art. So here we see their single Germfree Adolescents, which is probably their most famous track, and it's a ballad, a punk rock ballad with saxophone and kind of arpeggio guitar. And you see what she's done is she's repurposed some art taken from advertising and sort of placed it next to the lyrics of the song. I've got here an amazing book which her daughter put out. She died in 2013, by the way, Polystyrene. This is a book that her daughter put together. And the artwork that's in here is just amazing. She did all the posters, she did the album sleeves, she did the logos, and she also had an amazing dress sense. See if I can find a picture here. Here we go. That's Polystyrene. That's the kind of thing she would wear. She didn't look like any other punk, and she didn't write like any other punk. The music sounds punk, but it sounds very much its own thing. It's got its own sound. And I think what's amazing, there was a documentary that was on Sky Arts, I think it was at the weekend last week, called Polystyrene, I Am a Cliche. And it talked about the way that she challenged things. And one of the things that one of the people who they interviewed about it, who I think was possibly Kathleen Hanna from Bikini Kill, who were massively influenced by X-Ray Spex, she said, it's not that polystyrene's catching up with the world, it's the world's catching up with polystyrene, because in spite of the references to Woolworths and things like that, it seems like it's an album about today. I mean, songs like Identity are almost perfect descriptions of the world of social media. I haven't even started talking about the musical aspect of it yet, except in the briefest terms. The band are amazing. The drummer is powerful and precise. The guitar is spiky and angular and odd and draws from different musical styles. The bass is sharp and rhythmic, and there's a sax as well. I mean, which is an unusual instrument in a punk band. And over the top of it, this amazing voice. Strangely enough, X-Ray Spex weren't the first band that Polystyrene recorded with. She actually did some solo singles before in the pop reggae format under the name Mary Elliott, which was, a version of her actual name, which was Marion Elliott. Not quite as punk rock a name as Polystyrene, I think. So to sum up, X-Ray Spex were one of the most exciting things I'd ever heard when I first heard them, and listening to them back today, they still conjure up the same excitement. And frankly, they were utterly groundbreaking in the originality of the look, the sound, and the kind of vision at the heart of the band, as well as putting, as I said, a mixed race woman at the front of a really kick-ass rock band. So if you don't vote for them, essentially you're a racist.
And on that note, thank you, Olly. Terrific. So there we are. Olly asking for your votes, viewers, when it comes to voting later on for Germfree Adolescents by X-Ray Spex. Fantastic. So next into the virtual studio then, Chris, let's bring you over to Speaker's Corner. Chris, you now have the virtual floor. So tell us and share with the viewers at home the album that you've chosen and why you've chosen it.
No, thank you, Dan. Well, the album I've chosen is Dare from the Human League. Now, this is the first album. I'm not sure whether I bought it or had it bought for me, because I was only about 7 or 8 at the time in 1981. I think my sister and I went halves on this, and it blew me away, because it's that sort of age where you're in school, you're in primary school, there's that sense of conformity, you're very young, you're finding yourself. And then you'd watch Top of the Pops, and there's Phil Oakey. And this is, 2 years or a year or so before Boy George. And then you've got this guy who just looks like nobody else. And he was wearing the lipstick, he had that big fringe, and he's wearing lipstick. And, and you're watching it and just thinking, I've never seen anyone like this. But the music completely blew me away. There were quite a few tracks from the Dare album which were released as singles in the mid to latter part of 1981. And it's actually really funny that the one that everybody knows, that their biggest hit, it was also the Christmas #1 from 81, was Don't You Want Me, which is a very powerful music video, which I watched again just the other evening for the first time in decades. And there's something which, interesting to see what Olly was just saying about his selection and how it hasn't aged. And there was something in there. I mean, the video itself, it needs repeated viewings. And I know that there's a sort of Star is Born type murder mystery country house type element to it, but there's something about that song which is very haunting, where you've got Phil Oakey really saying to somebody, to a girl, and of course there are the 2 women in the band, there's Joanne Catherall, Suzanne Sully, and for me they're interchangeable. It's very Hitchcockian. You've got the brunette and you've got the blonde, but it's interesting that he's really saying to one of them, Suzanne Sully, we've been in a relationship, you're thinking of leaving, but I put you where you are now, I brought you up, I built you up, and I can knock you back down as well. And she's walking away from the set and she's just saying, well, we had some great years, but I've got my own life to take forward. And there's something in that, and she's like saying, I'm not going to give in to you. It was International Women's Day on Monday, and I watched the video for the first time in 40 years. It was also the day, of course, that the infamous interview with Oprah Winfrey, I'll say as little about that as possible, but it's just very interesting, that whole sense of having competing stories. She's walking away from the camera with a very strong voice, and the singing is carrying on. Phil Oakey is singing, but the words aren't coming out of his mouth, and it's like he's speechless. He's rendered, the woman who he thought he could master, he could control, he could dominate, is no longer submissive, and she's actually going to take that risk and go out on her own. So 40 years on, that is still very powerful. I'm not sure I got all of those motifs when I first saw it 40 years ago. Love Action is another one as well, with that sort of, it sounds like the violin or the cat that's being strung at the beginning, does it like 15 times, and you don't know where it's going. And as that song is going on, there's almost that meandering sort of tone. Is it a da 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 da? And you try walk in a straight line to Love Action. You sort of kind of feel like life. I've been at discos when I was at university. There was always a lot of indie stuff, which sort of wasn't really me. There was this big Christmas party, I think in 1992, and suddenly Don't You Want Me came on, and I thought, this is me. And I could go on the dance floor, and I didn't care. I thought, I can't dance, I know the words of this, I own this. And that is what I kind of feel about the Human League. I was never the coolest of kids, to be honest. Good job it was Christmas 81, not 80, because I could have been choosing, St Winifred's School Choir. There's no one quite like Grandma. But I thought the Human League is the only thing in my life about which I can say, I'm cool. I've got cool tastes. There's something about that. I know that they're performing again this year. There's the 40th anniversary Dare tour. Tickets are like 200 quid. But you know what? I'm seriously tempted to go. That song, that whole album, Open Your Heart is another one that was a big hit, Sound of the Crowd. 3 or 4 tracks on the album. I have no idea what that's all about. There's that 1 minute sort of synth instrumental. I don't know what that's, whether that was meant to be a bigger song. I thought it was just absolutely amazing, and it stayed with me 40 years on. It is so wrapped up in my own personal nostalgia. Dare by the Human League.
Fantastic, thank you, Chris. Yes, I mean, when one of the things that I'm talking to Olly about last week was that very narrow synth version of It's the Theme to Get Carter, isn't it? It looks like Olly is wielding the instrument.
Yeah, would you like me to play it for you?
Oh, please.
Oh, marvellous.
That's the actual instrument. I mean, not the very one, but that's the one instrument they use.
And it is very, I mean, and that's all you hear on the track, isn't it? That wonderful Roy Budd theme in the original that's got the sound of the train in the background and the harpsichord and that very funky bass line. And yet the one on Dare is stripped back just to that slightly ghostly single line tune. And that's all you get. You sort of blink and you miss it and you think, what was that?
And then it goes into a song which is about Judge Dredd, the comic strip character, straight after that. And the segue from that to the Judge Dredd song, I Am the Law, is amazing. It's a really amazing little transition. I shouldn't be talking your album up.
No, I might get some of the votes from your choice siphoned off. But the thing that I thought was really interesting is Phil Oakey apparently didn't think that they should release another track from Dare because they already had 3 hits, and so he really didn't want Don't You Want Me. It was the weakest he thought on the album, and it was also the last track on side 2. And of course, it ended up being a phenomenal hit. And of course, the music video was sort of done afterwards, and the rest is history. But it's the accident. It could have been Get Carter, perhaps, that was the one that was released, and that may have not quite made it into the top 10. No,
but it's also it's music, isn't it? That it's about they're breaking up, and I could put you back down too, and they're still working together 40 years on.
Yeah, and also the backstory, because he was desperate, because you had the split with Heaven 17 as they became Martin Ware, and what was interesting is that Phil Oakey, I think he owed lots of money to Virgin, I'm not sure, and so he was desperate to try and recruit new members of the band, and he went to I think you've talked about this before, Olly, but he went to a Sheffield nightclub, and on the floor were the 17-year-old Suzanne or Susan Ann as she was then, and Joanne Catherall, and they and he said, do you want to be in the band? Because they were so young, he had to ask their parents' permission to go on tour. They were in 6th form, ready to go to university, and 40 years on, they've only ever had one job. I think that's the story there. But I do all these nostalgia interviews. That there's something in there. That 40 years, that accidental. They happened to be on the dance floor that night. Phil Oakey was desperate to recruit members to the band, and it's all magic. But the story there was so meandering, circuitous, and almost just sort of like could have been so different.
Excellent. Well, we seem to have Olly also voting for Chris's album, so that may change by the end of the show. Who knows? But brilliant. Thank you, Chris. So, Harmony, let's move you into the virtual speakers floor. So, similarly, now you have the floor. By all means, tell us and the viewers at home the album that you've chosen and why you've chosen it.
So, I chose August and Everything After by the Counting Crows, and so I have I've always had a really eclectic is the polite way of saying poor musical upbringing, in the sense that I can sing you all the songs from Cabaret and all the songs from Chorus Line and a ridiculous amount of French 1940s, 50s, 60s sort of, pop ballads, because I was my mother's daughter and she sang all the time, and that's what I learned, and Italian stuff from the 70s and all that. But in terms of like whether it was punk or rock or hip hop, or I didn't know anything. And I moved to Istanbul in 1999, and my office was in a really quite fancy shopping mall, and on the ground floor was a record store owned by a really nice guy called Sami. And I'd go down and just, for my break, we'd just sit there, and he'd be obviously playing music. It was a record store. And every time I'd go, "Is this new?" And he'd be like, "No." It's just like, you've been hiding under a rock all your life, essentially. And so he came up with this idea that he would give me 3 albums a month. And he would give them to me. And if I would listen to them, and if I liked them, I would buy them. And if I didn't like them, he would take them back. And this is how I discovered, Jill Scott and Morshiba and Stereolab. Which doesn't mean that now I have a great musical culture. I only know what he has introduced me to, because I never really went far beyond that, sadly enough. And I still go around singing Cabaret. But August and everything after was something that just stuck to me. And I know nothing about the band. I mean, I wouldn't be able to recognize them in a crowd. I think they're American. That's the best thing I can tell you about them, but I know most of the, I think I know all the songs off by heart. And there's something, I've been, when Dan asked me to come on, to join you on this, I've been going through a very sort of melancholic period. I've organized a WhatsApp group with old friends that's called I Miss the 90s. And there's just a moment of like, I'd like to have a moment right now, which is uncertain, which is not, I am going to the same office and I am going to the same supermarket, and I am, I'm doing exactly the same thing today as I did yesterday. I just would like something that comes in my life as it used to in the 90s for me, that was just surprising and that completely threw me into another direction, as you were saying about what happened in that dance floor in Sheffield, like things like that, right? And I have a sort of real yearning for that at the moment. And this album sort of represents that in ways that I think the album has it speaks of a time where we weren't so focused on labeling situations and knowing the exact parameters that we were in and the contours of it. And it was messy and slightly problematic, right? I mean, the line that I tweeted, she knows that she's more than just a little misunderstood, or she'd like to meet a boy who looks like Elvis, right? These are things that I'm sure now we would have really good labels about the mental health problem that this person, and in many ways that's a good thing because we're paying the right attention. But in other ways, it reduces human lives to boxes that I feel at the moment so terribly constrained by. And so this album is that sort of fluidity and that uncertainty, and it's got the best description of love that I can think of, which is when kindness falls like rain and washes me away. And it's just, there's something so it's not even romantic, it's that moment of wow, there we go, we're okay, even that tiny little second, and that life's going to come charging back in a second and throw you off your course, but for 1 minute kindness flows like rain and washes you away. So there's a moment of just sitting there and being in this album that I find wonderful and absolutely necessary. And it reminds me of 3:00 in the afternoon, that sort of weird time where it's not really, it's not lunchtime anymore, but it's not really proper afternoon yet, and it's not sunset yet. It's sort of that weird time where you just sit and you can be horribly depressed at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and at the same time you can just sit and wait for it to pass and wait, and albums like that just allow you to go through 3 o'clock in the afternoon in a much more pleasant way than you usually would. So yeah, I mean, I traveled with it. I had I used to be a journalist, and then I resigned and went traveling across the Middle East and the Balkans on my own for a year, and I had a portable CD player with me. And this was one of the few, CDs that was with me. And so I listened to it over and over and over again on many, many, many buses through the Balkans and through the Middle East. And it was, it was my friend for a long time. And I miss it because I don't listen to it as much as I should anymore. I don't listen to much really, but it was glorious. And that, I think, is it.
Thank you, Harmony. And that's a lovely description of the album as it was my friend for a long time. I think that's something that comes out each time we do these shows, is that people come along with an album that has been their companion through difficult moments in their lives and sustained them through it, or it's been something that they fell in love with and they've gone back to again and again, and it's been a sort of constant companion. And the idea of music as a friend and an album as a friend that is there for you in good times and bad and offers consolation and support and so on is a really lovely idea. So and I like the idea that you now associate an album with travelling on many buses. I presume that will be the title of your autobiography, Many Buses, will it?
I did. I mean, there were honestly, when you travel, this was, the early 2000s, when you take a bus from Pristina to Sarajevo, which is really not very far, and it takes like 10 hours. And of course, you're the only woman on the bus. You don't understand anything anyone's saying. And everybody's smoking. I'd unfortunately quit smoking because I think the smoking would have been my other friend for that travel, but at least I had the Counting Crows that were still with me, that I hadn't had to shun, as a thing of the 90s.
Lovely, excellent. Thank you, Harmony. So Harmony's nomination August and Everything After by Counting Crows. So we come to our final sacrificial victim, our final panelist into the studio, Will. So let's move you into Speaker's Corner. So for the final time, Will, you have the virtual floor. So tell us and the viewers at home the album that you've chosen and why you've chosen it.
Okay, so the album I've chosen is kind of complicated, I think. On one level, it needs, the artists need no introduction. It's the Beatles, they're probably the most famous band that have ever existed. I think, they're generally regarded as a pretty good thing. It's weird to kind of say what's the album, because actually the title is not clear either. It's often just called The Beatles, which is confusing because The Beatles is the band. And it's often referred to as the White Album, which wasn't its title. It's just called the White Album because the album was entirely white. There was no graphics on the cover at all. The Beatles, the text "The Beatles" was embossed onto the front cover, so it just stuck out a little bit. And I think on the early editions there was a serial number, so like an edition number for the first however many albums. If you found one of those now, it'd be worth a fair penny. So it's an album without a title on one level. So what is this album? Well, it's the White Album. And the other thing, I'm proposing it as the best album ever. That's what we're here to do, isn't it? So it's an album full of contradictions because in proposing it as the best album ever, I'm willing to concede it's not even the Beatles' best album. Okay, so and I think in a way that's what's kind of wonderful about it, because we can point to all sorts of other brilliant albums the Beatles did, whether we're looking at Revolver or Rubber Soul or Sgt. Pepper or Abbey Road, really great albums, and this album isn't like those, and I think that's what makes it really, really special. So it was released, just a bit of context, it's released in 1968, and before that, the year before that, the Beatles did Sgt. Pepper. Now, if you were to kind of propose maybe a kind of groundbreaking, almost kind of perfect album, it's probably our first kind of real concept album, if you like, that kicks that whole it's a move from rock and roll to art, I think, you know, in what the Beatles do. They start off as a guitar band, 4 young guys from Liverpool singing rock and roll, and then Sgt. Pepper happens, and it's a concept, it's a whole world that they're creating, and the White Album marks a kind of return to them just making music at the same time as it being actually an advance in that kind of a work of art, I'd say. So there's something really interesting about that, and that kind of edition number, I think, points to that idea that this is somehow a collector's piece. And inside, if you bought the original double album, which I did, not in 1968. So that's another part of my story. I think I'm pretty much the same age as Chris, around the same age as Chris. So I should have been listening to Human League, but I wasn't. So my parents, I think, I've no idea about Chris's parents, but my parents were older, and I had 3 older sisters, all quite a lot older than me. So they were teenagers when I was 2 or 3, and so I had music from the kind of 70s in the house, if at all, because my sisters had then grown up and left the house, and I was left with my parents, who were much older than all my other friends' parents. And actually, for them, definitely, Elvis was a bit out there for my dad. So that was kind of he'd be listening to the Andrews Sisters, and my mum would be listening to Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, and so this was not a rock and roll household. So the Beatles, although I'm heading back, 15, 20 years earlier from my actual era, if you like, that was still a kind of parental rebellion to get involved with the Beatles. So this is 1968. I was an absolute Beatles nut in the mid 80s. I collected lots of Melody Maker articles and the rest of it. But I think what's interesting is this album's a mess. We know that they're the most famous band in the world, and yet only half of the tracks, and there are 30 tracks on here, some of which, any normal sensible person would have left some of them off the album. But they're brilliant songs. I suppose one thing to say, it's an indulgence, this album. So they made lots and lots of songs. They went on a retreat in Rishikesh with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and they wrote lots and lots of songs over a period of week, and they came back to Abbey Road and recorded them. And I think only 16 of the songs have the whole band on them. Some of them are being done by as essentially solo efforts. The band's beginning to crack apart. They're really doing their own thing. Sometimes they're recording 2 songs at the same time in different studios, with Ringo Starr running between studios to record the drum takes. And after all of that kind of massive process and production of Sgt. Pepper, actually the way they record this album is it's free, it's experimental. So they just jam and they play the song, and then they choose the best takes and they record over those. And sometimes they're snipping them up, literally cutting the 4-track recording. They're putting bits backwards in there to fox their fans. Some of them are then sped up and released at a different. So they're using all these different kind of recording techniques. And George Martin, who'd been given probably quite a lot of credit for being the producer on Sgt. Pepper. Actually, I think the Beatles are beginning to play with this equipment now themselves. And actually what we get is a really, really, I'd say, a more experimental album than previous efforts. And I think it really pays off. I think it's fantastic. The other thing about it is that they are just playing. So some of the music is just fantastic, and some of the music is a bit odd. Harmony mentioned Obladi Oblada. Okay, but they do a ska track. They do a kind of 1920s kind of piano number with kind of 1920s kind of. It almost sounds like the Bonzo Dog Band on Honey Pie, and then they've got a kind of Beach Boys parody with Back in the USSR. And the other thing about it, I was thinking about Olly's comment about this being an album for today. Remember, this is also 1968. We've notionally got some kind of counter culture revolution going on. And actually, they take a really interesting political stance on this, I'll say. What's interesting is there's a song on there called Revolution 1. there's another song called Revolution 9. There's nothing in between. So there's this kind of sense that, here we go. Yeah, it's another revolution. But they're also kind of this revolution, which they kind of say is, the lyric goes, we all want to change the world. You tell me that it's evolution. Well, we all want to change the world. But Lennon, interestingly, who you might kind of think is part of this whole kind of revolution and this social revolution, is kind of saying, well, if you're going to talk about hating the other guys, you can count me out. And there's something about this, is kind of 1968, in a way, a kind of lead figure of a kind of a symbol, if you like, of that kind of cultural change, is kind of saying, actually, this bit's not for me, guys. Don't you know that it's going to be all right? So there's something, there's something about those lyrics that I think is really powerful. And again, I think is kind of relevant to now in a very binary world where people are talking about the world changing. And actually, that's really cool. But, there's a sense in which we've got to watch out that the world changing doesn't mean we just bash the other guys. So there's something really quite interesting about that as a kind of idea at the moment. So I think it's an indulgence. It's an indulgence to listen to. Definitely the best album ever. I kind of thought I was cheating when I chose that song. There you are. That's my pitch for it.
Thank you, Will. So it sounds as though we should have given up the program before we started with your claim that this is clearly the best album is going to win. Everyone, we can almost declare the show over now.
Could I just ask, Will, is it the best album ever, or is it not even the Beatles' best album?
I think it's both of those things,
okay.
Olly. So I think you're right. It's not the Beatles' best album. I mean, there's none of those songs that are the kind of famous Beatles' best hits on there at all. But there's something about this album and its massive contradictions that actually I think makes it by far and away the most interesting of Beatles' albums. Unlike, I should say, your albums, actually. I mean, and that's not to denigrate your albums at all here. But when I was listening to your albums, there's a real sound on that Counting Crows album. There's a real sound on that Human League album. There's a real sound on the albums that you've all chose that remains the kind of. Sorry, I've forgotten the name of your album. I listened to it and enjoyed it earlier. There we are, Germfree Adolescents. There's a sound there, but I think every single song in here kind of says, oh yeah, and we can do this style as well. Oh yeah, this is fun. We'll have a go. Oh yeah, and there's something about it saying, hey, we've had 5-6 years since we've released our first album. We're the Beatles. We can do anything. And actually, let's just listen to us. So there's an indulgence about that, but it's also kind of cool. They can write anything.
There's a playfulness, isn't there? There's a thing where it's like you could argue that it's the birth of indie music in a way, because it feels like not everything has to be perfect. You could just throw something at the wall and see what's left there at the end. It foreshadows something like Beck or somebody like that, I think, in a way.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't know because I never really entered the 80s or 90s, Olly. So there's something about, but I think there's I think it foreshadows a lot. Helter Skelter feels like a heavy metal track. There's something around those kind of that we're hitting ska early, hitting blues early, and we're looking forward and backwards on that album. And that Revolution 9 is a kind of Dadaist trip, really. I mean, it's a really odd kind of. Talk about eclectic. It's all there in one listening spree, and they're splicing songs together for fun. So it's there's loads of kind of weird stuff, and I think because they're the Beatles, it's kind of really cool.
I think the notion of the notion of an album is also really interesting. It's something that has become. I remember the first time I went to visit a friend of mine in London, and he had one of these multiple CD players where it would sort of pick a track and then choose another CD. And I remember thinking, this is really weird. The idea that you will listen to different, and so I'm clearly not a radio listener, right? Because it wouldn't be so surprising. But I found it really odd, this idea that you would listen, and now I do it all the time, right? but the idea of now listening to an album from start to finish is there's something about the time you give yourself, which I think is lovely and really, yeah.
Also, let's think about the album as it used to be on vinyl, that it wasn't just that you listen to it from start to finish. You listen to it from the beginning of side one to the end of side one, and then you start again at side two. And so Artificial is the first track on Germfree Adolescents, but the first side ends with Identity, which is one of the singles from it. It's an absolute belting track. And you think, God, that was an exciting first half of an album, way better than those other ones that people have talked about. And then you turn it over and you get Genetic Engineering, 1, 2, 3, 4, and into the next song, and then it finishes with The Day the World Turned Dayglow. What an amazing apocalyptic vision of artifice and plastic culture taking over the world. And yeah, that shape of, from the start and to end of each side was something that was really important, I think, in the age of vinyl.
And that's something that in some ways that we've lost with the ability to compile playlists on Spotify and just trip readily from one song to another. As Harmony, you were saying about the experience that you give yourself in listening to a whole album, it becomes a very immersive experience, doesn't it? The fact that you set aside the time. In Will's case, you set aside half your life for a 30-track, behemoth.
It's wonderful, Dan.
But also, I mean, I think as Olly was saying, the importance of vinyl was also the tactile nature of the album. That the Gatefold album. I think, Sophie, we've talked about this before, haven't we? You open it up and it's the whole artistic experience of the lyrics and the artwork and everything inside the album is as much a part of the experience of the album as listening to it from one side to the other. How did you find this week's listening, Sophie, in terms of listening through to all the albums?
Yeah, great. Really enjoyed them. I've got memories and bits of my life that relate to all of them. But just to go back to, I was just thinking as you were talking about vinyl and then the turning over of the record, you also with CDs and now the kind of streaming and everything, you lose the ability that people like Kate Bush did on Hounds of Love and David Bowie did on Low, where you have a poppy short song kind of side, and then on the other side you then have this whole world and it's totally different. I would say David Sylvian does it on Brilliant Trees, and I think to say it's poorer for it is a ridiculously overblown thing, but it's a shame. And just talking about things being different, like the White Album or the Counting Crow all being really the same, I want it to be a bit more of an in-between. I think when things are too diverse and too different, I have a bit of a problem. When we had Night at the Opera, the Queen album, I felt a bit like that. And then Counting Crows feels almost totally homogenous. And it's a really fine balance, isn't it? The way you you're quite right. That made me laugh when you said about after lunch. You say that time of 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I always put that down to a sugar crash after lunch. That kind of doldrums you have kind of thing. But I know exactly what you mean, and it has a really strong atmospheric feel about it. I mean, my experience with this album was a male friend of mine playing it to me to try and say, "Oh, I think you'd like this," and I didn't like it. I didn't take to it at all.
Was it him or it that you didn't like?
No, we weren't romantically involved or anything like that. I don't think he was trying to impress me on that level. It just reminded, I was talking to Dan about it, it really reminded me of lots of, I was brought up in a middle-class academic family, and of course went to school with kids of the same kind of background, and a lot of the males in their teens remind me of this album. That kind of slight, I'm going to sound a bit rude, but a bit self-indulgent and a little bit miserable, but self-provoked misery. I can't really articulate it anyway. I mean, I didn't dislike it. I did like it. And God, thanks for that, Chris. That was great. I said to Dan the minute I put it on, I went, "Oh, I know all the words and all the songs." And I had slightly left them behind because as I've spoken about before, being brought up in the West End of Glasgow, you all had to try and be dead cool. And I'm afraid I went down the Heaven 17 route. And because I thought Don't You Want Me Baby was awful, and I hated it even on the album. I thought it was really Or yeah, so I thought, oh, I'll go the other route. I'll go Heaven 17. But so I was really shocked that I knew all the words. So I'd had that album and obviously pored over the lyrics and learned it all by myself, at the time. I'm a bit older than you. I was 12 when it came out. So, and I thought I was, precocious.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of those acts, I mean, it's a very poppy song, which in a way you could say, there's a bit of selling out going on. You think of Fergal Sharkey and the Undertones and the fact that he had that big number one in 85, and yet, his punk roots, people who were with him in the Undertones, just sort of disparaged him and thought he just completely sold out. And but of course, my way into Human League, I know Olly knows a lot more about them than I do, but I mean, my way into it was through the Dare album. So it was the popular stuff first, and the rest of it perhaps followed, or perhaps, if I'm honest, didn't follow. I'm not. Yeah. I know there are all their big single hits, even into the 90s, but the albums I'm not really so familiar with.
No, yeah, and it was a big step change though from being Boiled and the stuff that they had done with Craig Marsh and Martin Ware before they broke up. So yeah.
Could I pick up on the issue of mental health that Harmony raised in relation to the Counting Crows album? One of the things I love about Polystyrene is that, as well as being a kind of visionary, I think that came hand in hand with her own problems. I mean, she grew up in total poverty. Literally, they had a bath in their kitchen. That's the kind of flat that they had, a bath with a lid on it, right, in the kitchen when she was growing up. And she had severe mental health problems. And there was a story about she was round at Johnny Rotten's flat, and all the sort of male punks there were being a bit kind of ladsy and ignoring her, and she just went to the bathroom and shaved her head, right, which was, in a sense, a cry for help. But they had a gig the next week. This was in April 1978. They had a gig at the massive Rock Against Racism Carnival in Victoria Park, which was a hugely important thing. I mean, tens of thousands of people attended it. It was a sort of game-changing thing, sort of fight against the rise of the far right. And she went onto the stage at the beginning of their set with her head covered with a woolen scarf to hide the fact that she had a shaved head now. And at a certain point in the gig, she sort of takes it off like striptease style and reveals this skinhead. So here you have a mixed race woman at a Rock Against Racism gig, adopting and therefore sort of defanging the symbol of racism in music, of the skinhead haircut. I mean, although the story behind it was one of a mental health crisis, the outcome artistically astonishing. To confront an audience with that image at that point.
I mean, I have a really vivid memory of seeing her on Top of the Pops, singing Germfree Adolescents, and it being unlike anything else. And look, like when I chose Parallel Lines, one of the things I said about Debbie Harry was that singing ugly and that new way of seeing women at the end of the 70s, when you'd had ABBA and all that shiny disco and blah, 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 and how important it was. And when you were saying how current the album was, when I was listening to it, I was thinking, yes, it's current. And then I was going, but shit, that means nothing's changed. You know, over 30 years, being a woman now, I look back on the 90s and the noughties and just slightly hold my head and go, things feel like they've just gone backwards. And I mean that about racism as well and all sorts of things. And nothing's progressed. It feels really awful. Anyway, I mean,
when it does progress, like what I find when I was watching the videos of both of Don't You Want Me Baby and Polystyrene, the idea that sort of non-gender binary dressing is revolutionary. It's like, give me a break. No one's discovered anything yet. I mean, it's great. I'm really happy about it, but let's not pretend that this is something that hasn't. We're rediscovering it because, as you say, I think the 90s and the 2000s, I hate to call them the noughties because they
were I won't do that again.
Well, no, mainly because they were not naughty enough, really. It's so terribly boring, right? But I think that I find it fascinating that we feel that, some of these artists are bringing something completely new and revolutionary when we had so much of this 20, 30 years ago, right?
Yeah.
There's an interesting thing about non-gender binary and the Beatles, because Obladi as a song, which is revival. Yeah, opened the door. It was reviled even within the Beatles, right? But I would champion that song. I think it's great. And there's a bit where he reverses the gender of the characters, and apparently that happened because when they were doing the demo, he got it wrong, and John Lennon said you should keep that in, and they did. And I think it's a really charming aspect of that song.
That's right, Desmond with his barrow in the marketplace, and now she's a singer in the band.
Yeah.
You see, it's not a Marmite song, Olly. It's a marmalade song.
Nice.
And I mean, the thing that
okay, so I'm just going to put apart, because I've kind of said the White Album's crap here. There are some brilliant songs on it. So I'm thinking of While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Blackbird, Revolution, Back in the USSR, Dear Prudence. I think, fantastic music.
Helter Skelter as well. I mean, going back to that thing about sort of foreshadowing heavy metal, the same with punk as well. I mean, Susie and the Banshees covered that on their first album.
Dear Prudence, yeah.
Well, they covered Dear Prudence as well, but they covered...
Oh, sorry, they did Helter Skelter too, did they?
They did Helter Skelter on the first album,
Right.
It's a really banging version as well. Recommend it.
Yeah, I'll go and have a listen. I love Susie.
And that informal studio thing, because at the end of that you get Ringo Starr go, I got blisters on my fingers at the end of Helter Skelter. And so you've just got this kind of, I mean, it's really raw. I mean, I think just a reaction really to that Sgt. Pepper and reaction to that kind of overproduction potentially.
Although when you said it's the Beatles and they could do anything they want, all I could think of was, it's a bit.
Why do they do this? No.
Well, no, I think it's a bit my potted theory about Phantom Menace and George Lucas. Got too powerful that nobody had the guts to say, no, that's really rubbish. Don't do that.
Well, I mean, it's a good point. Actually, the producer did say we should leave about half of these songs off, and they said that. I mean, it was them saying, no, this is us. This is our album. We're gonna do it our way this time.
They've got a track record for that. There's that awful song, isn't it? I'm gonna put something in the movies. They're gonna put. Was that on Hard Day's Night?
Naturally.
No. What's that on Help? Is that on Help album or something?
It's on Help or Hard Day's Night, isn't it?
Basically, if they ever let Ringo do the vocals, you know to prepare for a rough time.
He has his first writing credit on the White Album. With a song called "Don't Pass Me By." I mean, and that's like a sort of country number, with a kind of country fiddle on it as well. And he sings the most appalling song at the end of it, which is just like the good night. Now it's time to say good night, and it's all sort of like a soupy kind of film score. But
I rather love that. I thought, look, there's that little melodic gem at the end, all kind of.
No, it's really kind of soupy. It's really kind of sentimental, and but I suppose there's just this kind of. I suppose with the Beatles album, you're always looking at two things, aren't you? You're looking at the music, but you've also got a story, and there's something here. Every time you listen to it, you're listening to four artists beginning to go their different ways here. I mean, George Harrison even got Eric Clapton in to do the guitar solo on While My Guitar Gently Weeps because he was fed up with the other guys playing. So there's something about this is the breakup of the Beatles really happening in front of you. But they all talk about the album really warmly.
And this is, but Olly said before the show that he has intermittent Wi-Fi. So this is at the point where you said this is the breakup of the Beatles. Olly disappeared, so that felt like a seismic moment. But I think one of the things that struck me about listening to Dare, Chris, was as soon as I put that on, I immediately thought, "Oh, this is Kraftwerk." The influence of Kraftwerk never disappears, does it? Somehow, and actually. I'm a huge Kraftwerk fan. I love kind of repetition and process music and so on, and so that definitely ticked a box in terms of it. It felt very influenced by that kind of sonic world created by Kraftwerk.
Oh, it was all that period because obviously "Don't You Want Me" was right at the end of '81, and then "The Model" was I think #1 in February of '82. So that era, they were all inspiring each other. There's you wouldn't have had the Human League without Kraftwerk without the Human League. They were completely ripping, not rip. What's what I'm looking for, but they were certainly riffing off each other.
Just to put in a nerdy correction there, it's true. You're right, except The Model was from the album "The Man Machine," which was released in 1978. So,
but as a single, that's interesting.
Yeah, no, it's true. It was released
in that era. Yeah.
And I think,
I'm afraid aren't the Craft almost the progenitor of almost all electronic music? I mean, it was started in the 60s. So, I mean, I don't know. Anyway,
yeah.
One of them.
Yeah. But similarly, you know, the idea of, I think Sophie and I have talked about this before. A lot of music reminds you of a lot of other music as you get older, because your listening experience has broadened and deepened, and you've been exposed to more music. And Harmony, when I started playing your Counting Crows album, I immediately thought that I'd stumbled across REM. There was something about that same sound world in the opening track, that same slightly guitar-based misery was the only way I could describe it. And so, you know, as much as I liked REM and I liked the Counting Crows album, there's still that kind of melancholy, I think, which was something I think that you mentioned about it as well. Right from the word go, it had that particular stamp on it.
There's a lot of rain, right? You just feel it. It's sort of, everything's a bit damp, you know. And the famous line, I need a raincoat, you know. I need a a phone call, which I always thought he said. I always thought he said I need a phone card, but he does not. Which would be even better, right? I need a phone card, but I'll forgive them for it. I need a raincoat. I need a big love, right? I need something that gets me out.
Absolutely. So this is the point in the show where I start, as we come to nearing the end, where I need to start enthusing you, the viewers watching, whether you're on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube, to start voting for your favourite album. Which of our panellists this week has convinced you that their album should be voted for as album of the week, notwithstanding that Will claims his choice is the best album ever. But just drop a comment in whatever platform you're watching, and we'll be able to see that, and we can tally that towards this week's album of the week, which it's been quite a unique listening experience this week. You know, obviously Sophie and I each week are working through all of them, and I think that Identity we've mentioned before. It's a track on the album that Olly chose, but we've also talked about it in terms of Sophie, you were saying the homogeneous nature of the sound of Harmony, your choice, the Counting Crows, and the sprawling sense of Will. You know, the White Album. You said very sort of insightfully that it felt like it was an album in which the band are showing off the different styles that they can create, and you know they're so famous and so sprawlingly large that they can dip into anything, which was quite true of that 30-track Odyssey. You know, it's a band showing that they can do it all.
Yeah, completely. It's interesting. While it was being made, they called it, and I didn't know this. And in just getting ready for this show, I kind of did some digging on it. But apparently, while they were calling it was called the Doll's House, and I think there's something about it, about kind of opening it up and going into a different world, and you don't quite know what you're going to discover in the next room.
Yes, yeah. So there we are. We have our first vote for Joe. You're voting for Dares the Human League, but mainly due to memories of school discos. Is that the same for you, Chris?
Oh, sorry.
Memories of school discos.
Oh, do you know, I'll tell you, I mentioned the university arts hall Christmas 92 disco where that came on, but it's the one that would get everybody on the dance floor. I went to a reunion at my alma mater, as they'd say in America, would have been 2019 before lockdown, and everything closed down at 12 o'clock. So it was 11:56. We were told, you've got one more track before we have to disperse. I put on Don't You Want Me, and it had the same effect. Everyone thought, we know it, we feel okay. It kind of brings people together in that whole school disco 1981 Adamant, Shakin' Stevens kind of sort of era, when that was the sort of thing that came on, and it stayed with us. I'm glad, Joe, you felt the same way.
There's touches of Gary Newman, I think, about there as well, isn't there, in the Dare album? David is voting for the White Album. Just beats Germfree Adolescents, but there you are, Will.
Yeah.
I'm delighted about that. It's interesting though. I think there are no songs on the White Album that would get everyone onto the dance floor.
No, that's true.
There's nothing there. I think that. It's all quite. Every song's a bit niche, but I think I think those. You're absolutely right, Chris. Those kind of numbers are rare. I'm thinking, come on, Eileen now. Everyone's out there bopping away.
I just really like the idea of people trying to dance to Revolution 9.
Hey.
Yeah.
Get on the boat.
Quite an interesting sort of creative
Glass onion. Yeah.
challenge.
There we are. And Harmony, there's a vote for you for Counting Crows.
It's my politics.
You can't.
Harmony all the way. She's just very convincing. Oh, there we are. Such school-based loyalty.
Absolutely.
You run that
Loyalty is
account,
everything
Harmony.
in politics, as we know.
I'd also just like to point out that if anybody's been listening to the Human League album through Spotify, like I have, other streaming services are available, that they've decided to put an exclamation mark at the end of the word dare.
Yeah, no, apparently, in America, it was because in America, when it was released in, I think, spring of '82, they added in the exclamation mark. You're right. Dan and I were talking about that the other day. I thought, I'm sure it doesn't have the. I haven't, unlike Olly, I haven't got the original album. I don't know. Maybe my sister's got it, but
it's not on the original cover.
Not on the original.
No. It's a
I
bit
do
like.
Sorry. I do feel that we've been slightly, not unfair, but I think when we were talking about sort of the fact that there's no longer albums and that we sort of have streaming services that we're in, and at the same time, I have found myself in really difficult situations recently where the fact that I could just put some music on my phone anywhere, any place, to be, life-saving is excessive, but incredibly helpful, to say the least. And that has, I must say, there's something about being able to bring that moment of music in with you anywhere that is quite remarkable.
I suppose it's the ease and the accessibility with which you're able to come across music. I think my kids can listen to music on Spotify. My daughter's musical experience is infinitely wider than mine would have been at her age, because she's able to encounter all sorts of different musics that for me, when I was a teenager, if I didn't hear it on the radio or I was going down to the Worthing Library and borrowing it over the weekend or something, just the opportunity to broaden your listening experience is something that, as you say, streaming has actually, whilst it may have undermined the sort of concept album listening style, it's opened up other listening opportunities, which I think maybe has been a benefit. That's right.
Curate a soundtrack to your whole life.
That's the thing, Chris, you've probably come across this before, but that's the great thing about pop music. It bottles your sense of the time, doesn't it, and your memories and where you were at that particular moment. And then when you come back to that piece of music and you listen to it again, it's like you uncork the bottle and all those memories remain as vivid as they were when the album struck you and had its greatest impact.
Yeah, the original memory and all the different layers that come with it. You often remember that original experience. So when Jo in her comments mentioned the school discos, that's exactly what I'm taken back to. And, my musical knowledge at that time was very limited. So, of course, if you'd asked me in 1981, what's your best song ever? My answer would be something that was a hit in 1981. But 40 years on, when I would still go back to 1981 and say that was the best music ever. So in a way, I can't disentangle it, and it's actually quality proof. I was joking about Winifred School Choir, but when you grow up with that sort of stuff, then it's with you. And when people say, "Oh, it's a load of rubbish," you say, that's not the right criteria to judge it by. It can be the same with films. But in my podcast, when we talk about nostalgia, academics, we don't talk about what's your second monograph and tell me why you wrote that book. It's all about the stuff that they grew up with, the music, and that's the gigs they went to, what they heard on the radio. In my case, it was all radio. It was Mike Reed and the Radio 1 Breakfast Show, all that sort of stuff, which was so pioneering. And in an age of Spotify, some of that magic has definitely gone away.
Nice reference to Mike Reed there, now famous for doing the hilarious Calypso for UKIP.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Olly, thank you. Thank you for reminding me of that. And of course, the guy who also inadvertently got Frankie Goes to Hollywood to #1 by saying, "Don't buy it, it's filth." Of course, missed the trick there.
I love the idea of inadvertently getting somebody to #1. That sounds like it's an album title right there.
Yeah, Revolver. Yeah, inadvertently.
So, Sophie, you've been keeping the schools on the doors. How does it lie at the moment? It feels like it's neck and neck.
I know, it's a three-way. I'm afraid, Olly, you're the only one without a vote so far.
Although, to be fair, we're talking about 3 votes having been cast. It's not like I was thinking we might get 20 or something.
I know. I'm afraid every week it's the same.
We were saying in the green room before we came on air that this was the week where the voting had become most important, didn't it? The competitive nature, of everyone vying for votes and Will leaping in saying, "Well, clearly my album's going to win." The competitive edge. I felt that it was good that we had someone who on the panel who was to do with conflict analysis, because there was likely to be a time when we were likely to need to draw on your skills, Harmony.
Well, what's nice and what makes this feel particularly futile for me is the idea that everybody else has won and I've lost. So
you must be the winner.
Although that feels strangely appropriate for a punk album, something that's aggressive and all about, punk is like kind of running up to someone and poking me in the eye with a sharp stick, and so your victory is simply the sort of instant moment of aggression. So you may not have won the votes, but by not winning, the punk album has come out the strongest.
By goodness, you've shown us, Olly.
Yeah. I feel that.
Oh dear me. So it looks like, yes, we declare this after the mountain of votes that have been submitted. We declare this a three-way tie between Will's The White Album by the Beatles, Harmony's August and Everything After by Counting Crows, and Chris's Dare by the Human League, with an honorary mention for the anti-win of Olly's Germfree Adolescents through X-Ray Spex. So it just remains for me to say a huge thanks to my panel, to Harmony, to Chris, to Will, to Olly, and to Sophie as usual for graciously giving up 1 hour of their multitudinously houred lunch breaks in order to come and share their enthusiasm this afternoon. Viewers at home, I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been a wonderful experience. Thank you to everyone for taking part, and thank you at home for watching. I've been Dan Harding, and stay tuned same time again next week when Vinyl Countdown will be back. Thank you for watching.